Honor your father and mother. A commandment for adults? This time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. In this series on the 10 Commandments, we are going to tackle the next two commandments, the Fifth and Sixth Commandments. Now, the Fifth Commandment comes to us from Exodus 20:12. Quote, "Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you." Now, this is one of those two positive commands, the thou shalt commands, as opposed to thou shalt not command. And all the parents out there are going to hate me for saying this. But the fifth commandment is not for children. It's for adults. In ancient Egypt, parents and children were disconnected by their households. When a son grew up and was about to be married, there would be an arrangement of a marriage, and then the son would build a house for his new bride. And then he would leave his father and mother, collect his bride, and they would start a new household. This had the effect that the son would become concerned with his new household over what would happen with the house of his parents. And we see that this is a cultural difference that the Israelites had to negotiate. Now, we have to kind of remember that the Israelites are Amoritic Levantines. They come from the Levant, and particularly their cultural roots are in northern Mesopotamia. In northern Mesopotamia, many generations would live under the same roof in these massive, massive houses, these hall-style homes. But when they came to Egypt, things changed. They started to adopt Egyptian customs, and they lived in Semitic-style homes, essentially single-family dwellings. So, when they came to Egypt, they started living as the Egyptians did, where, say, parents no longer lived in the same home as their married children. Now, this was okay for, say, Egyptians, who, for example, might have a lot of servants and slaves to help elder parents out in their, say, last years. However, with the Israelites, not all Israelite homes had servants. So, this created a disconnect where, say, a parent might be abandoned. So, what happened is that the whole culture started having this disconnect between, say, generations. So now comes this fifth commandment. And it is an attempt to deal with this problem. Now, the whole idea of honor is difficult. Okay? The Hebrew word is the word kavod, meaning to give weight to. But it also has other meanings, which means to have abundance or importance. It's the idea that important things are weighty or abundant. Honor in its cultural context, therefore, comes from a position of power and agency. Small children have neither wealth or power. So even though it's real tempting to use the commandment to honor your father and mother with your children, it's actually not meant for them, it's meant for you. And that can be kind of a hard pill to swallow. I mean, we like pointing out commandments when they apply to other people. But it really applies to us, the adults in the room. And it's really aimed at us as adults because we have the ability to fulfill the commandment. whereas children cannot fulfill this command. If your father is in need, you take him in. A child cannot do that. He has no control over what happens in the home. If your widowed mother cannot feed herself, you feed her. A child is not in the position to do this. The exercising of kavod is one that requires resources and the ability to exercise autonomy. So, really, this commandment is aimed at adults, not children. Now, we have to remember that this command is not a burden to subject yourself to an abusive parent. We have to be realistic that many parents are dirtbags, are selfish, are narcissistic, they're manipulative, and this command is not intended to subject yourself to being abused. What this command is it's a safety net. It's a social safety net to give parents, make sure they're not destitute in their time of need. And as long as their needs are met, the weight of kavod is honored at that point. Now, we also have to remember, too, that the reason this command exists and why we are expected to honor our father and mother as they are idealized is not for their benefit, but it's for your benefit. And it's for the benefit of your posterity or children who will learn from your example. The reason why is this commandment is also connected to a promise. If you honor your father and your mother, your lifespan will be extended. The Hebrew here literally says to be lengthened as a result. Now, this is one of those sort of proverbial promises that's attached. So, it's not a guarantee, but it's better than not that if you honor your father and mother, you too will live a long life. Whereas, say, for example, if you shun your father and mother and go off on your own and do things that are destructive, your life will be probably shortened as a result. Some of this is just plain common sense. But it does play very much into, say, the clan culture that we find in the ancient Near East, and in particularly in Israel, where people were dependent upon their inheritance of the land and their connection to the broader community. So there's very much a community aspect here that's in play with this commandment. So this is a commandment that's not just about honoring your father and mother, but it is also about trying to maintain connection with, say, your extended family and your clan and your broader community at large. So that covers the Fifth Commandment. Now, let's talk a bit about the Sixth Commandment. Exodus 20:13. You shall not murder. Okay. Seems pretty straightforward. Older translations will say, thou shalt not kill. But kill is not really what is intended by this commandment. The commandment is really only 2 words, which essentially translate to never murder. The word for murder is ratzak. Hebrew has several words for killing, but ratzak only applies to the killing of human beings. It's never used with killing of animals, like, say, to slay or to slaughter. It really only applies to human beings. So in that sense, basically the commandment means you shall never kill an innocent human being. Okay, so that covers sort of the intent of the Sixth Commandment. Now, there's a little hitch here, a little catch. The Ten Commandments are part of the Sinai covenant that God made with the Israelites. So these are the 10 commandments that are written on the tablets and brought down to the children of Israel. And the children of Israel agreed to these 10 commandments in exchange for having Yahweh be their God. And while the 10 commandments is a description of the behaviors that displease God, the laws of the covenant are specifically binding upon those whom God has his covenant, that is, the Israelites. However, the Sixth Commandment is unique because it is binding on all mankind because it predates 10 Commandments. It is actually first mentioned in Genesis 9:6. After the flood, God cuts a treaty with Noah, and he says to Noah, quote, "And surely I will require your lifeblood. From every beast I will require it, and from every man, and from every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he created man." So if a man commits murder, God allows that for that blood to be avenged. And in doing so, God established a prohibition against murder. The reason we are told is that man is created in the image of God. Thus, to commit murder is to desecrate the image of God. We have to remember that when God created man in the Garden of Eden, he created the bodies of humanity as an idol or sacred image to hold God's image. So, to murder a man is to desecrate God's idol. But this commandment has a further implication that we do not own our own bodies. We're only leasing them. And as an image bearer, we reflect the face of God to the world. So this commandment is not just against the murder of a human being, but against anything that would deface the image of God. And, this includes, say, self-harm or suicide. And it turns out that each commandment is a catch bucket for a variety of offenses. In this case, the prohibition against murder is more than just killing a human being. Jesus Christ makes it clear that even hating someone in your heart or wishing them harm was enough to violate this commandment. So we see here that the Sixth Commandment, the commandment against murder, is much, much broader than saying, well, I haven't killed someone. That then raises the question, well, have you hated someone? Well, yeah, of course I have. Well, then you violated this commandment. It becomes an ever-rising standard of holiness and purity that, in the end, becomes impossible to keep perfectly. Anyway, I hope you learned something from the Fifth and Sixth Commandments. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.